everyone, and thank you for joining us today as we present the latest instalment in the Octo Telematics Smart Talks series. The topic for today is centered around understanding and managing risk in the sharing and gig economies. Despite the recent short-term impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the sharing and gig economies are here to stay. Managing risk from an insurer's perspective, particularly where the concept of employer-employee owned asset and shared asset are being stretched, is somewhat tricky. And so today we'll explain the challenges of risk management for the gig and sharing economies and see how insurers can use dynamic data to help them address the new risk models required. My name is Martin Otter. I'm the Strategic Partnerships Director for Octo Telematics, and I'm joined today by Karl Sawyer, who's an industry specialist in the tech, media, telecoms, gig and sharing industries. Karl has been in the insurance industry for over 20 years with a wide range of roles, including in-house risk manager for a FTSE 100 company, broker, claims handler, underwriter, and loss adjuster. So it really does bring a wide perspective on this topic. Karl is working with Willis Towers Watson in their tech, media, and telecoms practice, a global practice with a specialism in mobility as a service. Today's webinar is part of our Smart Talks series, where we explore a wide range of topics involving the connectivity around people, places, homes, industries, and vehicles. Follow us at Octo Telematics on LinkedIn for the latest on our webinar series. There will be time for questions at the end of today's session, so please feel free to add your questions to the chat feature within the webinar, and we will answer as many questions as we can in the time available. There's three key points that we want to discuss in our webinar today. Firstly, to understand how the gig economy and sharing markets are growing and evolving, despite and maybe because of the impact of COVID-19. We've seen a huge growth in last mile delivery services and people thinking about the new economy in a different way. Insurers, however, in their traditional models need historic data. And historic data is in short supply, particularly as these new sectors are growing rapidly and evolving rapidly. And what we believe is that technology partnerships can really help businesses, insurers, risk managers get insight to help them mitigate and transfer risk. So today's session is really around how technology can help mitigate risk in the gig and sharing economy sectors. So I'll hand over to Karl, who's going to take us through the first part of the webinar. Over to you, Karl.
Thank you, Martin. So as Martin alluded to, Willis Towers Watson is a global consultancy basis. We actually specialise in the dual areas of risk and human capital and benefits. So in fact, we should be naturally in this position for, especially where the growing gig economy lies. So as alluded to, I work with a range of clients from large multinational OEMs to tech-based startups. The overall key message, I think, as made relevant on the key points is probably collaboration. So and also where risk management works, it's been integrated within the business at the start, and it thrives through its development. And that's primarily because insurance is so difficult to acquire within this market because of some of the key points that Martin stated in terms of historical data. There is no historical data because a lot of these companies haven't been in operation for more than 2 or 3 years. So I'm a methodical man, so I go through things in processes. So in terms of this, I start off with the risk identification in the sharing and gig economies, as the slide shows. So firstly, we look at the client reputation. So what we mean by client reputation is there's a variety of stakeholders in the gig economy. It could be the end consumers, or it could be the restaurants. In today's cancel culture, which is a phrase, a small issue, whether legally incorrect, could still affect a business model. And then we go on to one of the areas probably most concerned of the clients is workforce reputation. The recruitment and retention of the delivery workforce is of utmost importance. The level of riders being on multiple platforms is large, especially within urban areas. And there is a constant battle between the flexibility and consideration of a workforce. And this is very much driven by the regulatory framework within a territory. So essentially whether that individual is an employee or is a freelancer. And then we're moving more and more actually into the regulatory of the vehicle, where they're using a huge variety of vehicles now. And where we can say this is normally taxis, for instance, would be a typical gig economy thing. With taxis, we're moving into the worlds of big lorry cabs that are coming as part of the sharing economy, all the way down to an e-scooter for a 2-minute journey. And again, the regulation changes can have a huge impact on the insurance costs or even the amount of vehicles that are available, whether owned by the client or the workforce indeed. Then we move on to the regulatory of the workforce. So this is the key concern of most of their legal teams. It often constricts what they can do from a risk management perspective, is it could cross the boundary from freelancer to employee, and we'll go into that in full aspect later slide. And what we're seeing now as well is the business model, so the method of transportation. So in the gig, the driving force is how to react to product demand. So originally, the gig economy was based on food delivery, and it's all about the speediest delivery, because obviously the heat of a meal is absolutely crucial. But now we're looking at more different types of products. So we're moving into the pharmaceutical areas, and we're moving into clothes. So there's clients in Europe where the clothes are delivered, the individual tries the clothes on, and the returns are taken by the rider as well. So there's a whole different method of transportation there. So e-scooters in the UK, just come under coverage, require motor liability coverage, yet allow a 16-year-old with no on-road experience and a provisional license to effectively be the next gig worker. So that's changing all the time. And then more of the corporate and social governance areas is the environmental. The vast majority of movement is away from petrol and diesel to electric, but this brings numerous risks from the likes of charging points to accumulated fire risk in storage. And I know that some of our risk management specialists at Willis Towers Watson are incredibly fanatical and geeky about this, right down to the fact that fire engine services will not respond to electrical based fires within things. So it's definitely something that's is high up on there on the agenda. As we move to business model asset value. So this is in terms of the vehicle as an asset. And there's a fast becoming, especially in the car sharing fleets, individuals owning mini fleets for hire. So the financing of these in order to buy them is integral to their business models, and therefore their risk is not essentially the risk of them getting revenue, it's the risk of having that asset and not depreciating that asset hugely in value so they can sell it on. And they can maintain that vehicle for the optimal time. And business model, what I would call multimodal. So this is again showing where a company, so for instance, a company like Lime, a company like Uber, where they've started off in one particular area. So obviously taxis with Uber, but now they've moved across, so they're using their data to go into the world of commercial logistics, and then they're picking up Uber scooters for last mile. So that's the acquisition of Jump that they made. So essentially the passenger becomes the operator on that Uber vertical model. And as I alluded to before, cargo. Food delivery is still of primary importance. It is something which needs to get from A to B in the quickest way possible. However, the chemist deliveries are up, especially around helping isolated people during COVID, to those deliveries of high-end fashion. So where the delivery person will wait whilst you're trying on reducing the clients. So they're using the gig economy itself to solve issues which the normal ways of working aren't sufficient enough. Obviously, every slide in 2020 needs to have COVID-19 written on it, but this is also because of the impact that this has had on the sharing economies in terms of acceleration of change. So overall, it's a huge opportunity, but with the exposure of a lot of people to delivery and the sharing economy, is it has to bring in massive new protocols, increasing the costs, such as cleaning regimes. So if I go on to the next slide, and again, using my methodological approach, we go on to the other areas of risk management process: quantify, mitigate, and transfer. So quantify is how big is that risk? What data can you use to do that? So we're seeing this in journey data, in the data coming from the vehicles, but also in individual user data as well. And this is where they're using individuals in terms of credit scores or social scoring systems, behavioral indicators, to indicate how that person is going to behave in a situation. This is incredibly important where in that short time, you've got a snapshot of that individual. It's more used to them probably in the sharing economy sector, how will people look after somebody else's vehicle, but it's fast becoming heavily used. And then contextual data. So seasonality, weather, demand. Food delivery is often linked to bad weather, where you can't get out, but these people are delivering, so it's inherently more risky, and some of their peak times are the times when you wouldn't normally go out to drive yourself. So dark nights in November and December. And then loss history. So again, this back to the risk points, the key points beforehand, it's limited. So the biggest gap concern is for underwriters who really like 3 to 5 years of losses. However, due to the business changes, you could argue, are these even relevant without understanding the business model at the time? So what I refer to is that something that started out with food delivery that's moved into pharmaceutical or high-end retail delivery, which is not as time sensitive, will produce, hopefully, an overall a better risk. So then we go into to mitigate. And this is where, again, if we go back to the gig economy, is how do these companies mitigate these risks without overstepping that mark? So we've seen it with physical control measures. So again, using most of these the micro mobility things like the e-scooters and the electric scooters have so much tech on them that they're easily controllable. So we've seen e-scooters in Germany deactivate if the road temperature goes down to a certain level, which indicates that freezing will occur. So therefore, they're taking a physical control measure to stop the asset from being used even. And then we move on to rider training. Again, through app interaction, they're often basic levels. However, we expect more in this area. So a new hire of a car, for example, could see a short video showing indicators, hazard warnings, buttons, etc. So where personalization and gamification may be more involved. PPE, we're not talking about masks in this situation normally. We're talking about helmets. So where items are encouraged and supplied it's often seen as useful by insurers, but without tracking usage and maintenance of these items, they could be seen as a risk in themselves. So for instance, if you supply a crash helmet for a bike, how are you going to be able to tell that crash helmet is going to be in optimal usage, hasn't involved in the accidents before? And again, the amount of technology coming out of Asia in this area is incredible. Then we go to maintenance. Obviously, maintenance regimes are very, very important in this area, especially for sharing vehicles, keeping those up to date, keeping those maintenance records. And then FNOL, first notification of loss. Insurers are probably more fanatical about this now than they've ever been. This is what's regarded as, I would say, what you would call post-event mitigation. And I expect to see this develop greatly where an operator is also providing perhaps personal accident or income protection. Providing seamless insurance response should, in a way, increase both client and workforce reputation. So you're using the insurance and the FNOL as a way of increasing your reputation as well as mitigating your claims as well. Geofencing, simple, it works. So again, that sort of alludes to the physical control measures where you're stopping the use of these vehicles, or at least perhaps alerting people within it. And then we go into journey management. And with journey management, this is both a great opportunity and a risk. So you're using all of that risk data, you're using all of those mitigations. Is there a way of making the journey easy? Is there a way of lowering the risk on that journey? So active journey management on perhaps a car sharing website or something like that with car sharing assets or e-scooters, that would be seen as useful because it's a duty of care enhancer if they get it right, but it also leaves liability if they get it wrong as well. And then finally we go into transfer, and this is essentially around the insurances are available or required for the sharing gig economies. So I've listed some of these areas which are statutory. So with liability insurance, that will be road traffic in the UK, but more and more the liability insurance is becoming a demand from the local authority requirements. It also increases the brand value of a sharing and gig economy. So many of the insurers in this space are high street, well recognized insurers, and that's mainly a demand from the clients. So again, through reputation connection, enhancing the reputation of those platforms. And as we see companies grow, we're finding that the traditional insurance market is not using the value of the amount of quantification I mentioned previously, those that would still always encourage a greater retention of risk by the insured. So it's up to me and others really to help these businesses on that journey. So it's where the market is not providing the optimal solution. Is there any areas where because of that data, because of that quantification data, that the clients themselves can use to pick that risk level? And other areas that we look at is personal accident insurance. Again, it's enhanced the reputation, especially within Europe, where it's more viewed as an essential item. And then through that, income protection insurance. So this is for the gig workers. I've not seen many examples of it at the moment, but I do feel it's something which, again, showing a duty of care, showing flexibility to the workforce should lead that way. And then with risk financing, again, it goes back to looking at the risk, looking at the quantification data, and almost analysing the data yourselves as you were an insurer and saying, right, what level of risk am I happy about, because I can control the quantification and I can control the mitigation. And it's all about finding a level which the client is happy with, the insurance market's happy with, and where you've got that base support of the technology being able to evaluate and analyze constantly for those decision making. So I'll hand it back to Martin.
So, highly responsive technology is mission critical to the gig and sharing economies, and is generally helping them focus on their core delivery, which is delivering a service within a restricted time window in a highly efficient way. Technology use cases range from scheduling systems, devices to monitor location, utilization systems, smartphone as a sensor applications, and, as we mentioned before, remote unlocking or remote control systems. And this is just to name but a few. From a risk management perspective, we would say that actually the technology itself is not important. There's many similarities between the risk profiles of different businesses, regardless of whether or not they're delivering food, parcels, a service, or remotely unlocking a vehicle for someone to use, knowing it's safe, maintained, and in these days sanitized. What is important is the data available from these technologies to help understand and manage risk. Knowing about how, when, and where, as Karl has said, a business is exposed to the risk, and being able to analyze that data and to augment traditional risk management is really what's important. So we look at a range of different sensors that could deliver data, really trying to understand where, when, and how is this business exposing itself to risk. And then, having taken that data, and the data is more important than the technology, we then look at trying to do analytics and insight to help the stakeholders that we're trying to support. So in this case, the business itself, the insurance industry, and indeed the employee, gig worker, sharer user, whatever you want to call them. And we see a real role for analytics and insight to support all of these stakeholders. I'd probably class the workers and the users as some of the most important people in the stakeholder list. And that's really because in this new economy, it's falling for them largely to shoulder the responsibility for their own health and safety. And so sharing insight with workers as to how to reduce their risk, or sharing insight with shared vehicle users as to how they can make sure that the risk of accident and loss and injury is reduced, is really important. So we envisage smartphone applications with feedback on driving behavior, risk exposure, other things, maybe some gamification, maybe some incentivization, which is really helping play a part in improving the risk profile for these businesses, for the workers, and ultimately, I guess, for the insurance companies as well. So that concludes the formal part of the presentation in today's webinar. I'm going to move toward the questions and answer section, and we'll get started with some of the questions that have come in during the time that we've been speaking. Okay, so Karl, question for you, please, if you will. What are the key considerations when creating a risk strategy that is informed and optimized by data?
Okay, it's a difficult one. So a risk strategy is obviously, I think you start off with the strategic objective, to try and understand what is the point of the data you're using, and how can you get to that point. So a risk strategy is to say, right, so the risk strategy could be it's an improvement upon your risk. It could be in pure financial concepts, it could be you get cheaper insurance. Now those two aspects are not mutually exclusive, but the key consideration you should have is that data going to be available all the way through that journey? And I think, do any of the aspects of the risk change significantly, and are you commenting on that as you go through the journey with the data. So what you could say in a typical format is that, okay, you've given a typical client on a fleet, we'll say there's 5 years worth of risk management there. So 5 years worth of losses. If your fleet has changed from petrol, diesel vehicles, low value, etc., and they've gone to electric vehicles with assisted driving, etc., then what does that data tell you? The data only tells you how many losses you've had. What you've got to make sure is you've got commentary on that data explaining the reasons why that data's possibly changed, and then how can you bring in other bits of data that's either structured or unstructured. So again, relating to some of the credit scoring, is there any other behavioural indicators that you can get that will help you with that journey?
Okay, Karl, thanks very much for that. And another question, while we've still got some time, who's best placed to provide services that mitigate risk for the gig and sharing economy? Is it the businesses themselves, insurers, risk managers, or technology companies?
Obviously, I think it's probably a mixture. I definitely think there's an opening for, obviously, Octo, but that's probably because of the demographic that we're dealing with as well. And what I mean by that is that there's a whole generation that have, especially in Europe, that have had to have a black box within their car to get their motor insurance. So they're already used to that type of technology within their vehicles, and therefore I think that's probably useful for the tech companies, and especially for the tech companies being able to provide not just a telematics solution in isolation, but the other things that you spoke about is the gamification, the personalization of those areas. So I think they're definitely leaders in that space. Insurers, again, they're very reliant on historical risk data, but the more and more they're learning and the more they're developing their models, then that's also best. And again, the risk management community and the brokers. So I really do think it's a collaboration exercise.
Perfect. Thanks, Karl. So I'm afraid it's time to wrap things up. Any questions submitted that weren't answered here, we'll reply to each contributor individually. Our next webinar topic in the Smart Talk series is Vision Zero. Mobility is essential for people and businesses, but there's no denying the recent benefit of restricted mobility on the environment, safety and traffic congestion. Please tune in to explore how new mobility solutions can help us move closer to Vision Zero without compromising our mobility. We hope that you found today's topic informative. Connect with us on LinkedIn, please, to get the latest on Octo and our webinar series. On behalf of the entire Octo organisation, I want to extend our gratitude to Karl for his thoughtful presentation, and thank you all for your participation.